I've only been in Minnesota since 1981, late 1981, and I, to be honest with you, wasn't at all involved in politicking kind of stuff until I left my full-time job, and that's at the end of 1996. So I wasn't necessarily paying attention to who was what or what was what. I just knew that Minnesota was a great place to live, and it seemed to have government that worked. And I didn't worry about things like elections and being able to vote, and because it all worked. Well, it develops that a lot of the reason it all worked is because Joan Growe was in office as a Secretary of State for 24 years. So she was elected in 1974. She, in her official biography, it says, or I'll call it official anyway, it says she was the state's first woman elected to a constitutional office in her own right. So I'm waiting for the day to explain to a young person what in the world I am talking about. What does that even mean? What it means is she was elected not because she was connected to a spouse or something else. She was elected in her own right, as running on her own thing. Okay. And from 1974 until 1999 was Secretary of State. So where I was going with all of that was, I don't know truly how, maybe we're going to find out, I think, how Joan Growe feels about us. But I know how we feel about her, which is like, oh, wow. I don't have enough adjectives to tell you how truly wonderful you are, and how truly wonderful we knew you were once we started having to argue about voting rights and election issues after you were out of office. So, and I think with that, I will introduce Joan Anderson Growe. Please welcome.
Thank you. That was a very kind introduction. I appreciate that, and much less boring than reading usual. So, but I just feel honored to be here and to be part of the conversation. This is quite an undertaking you have, and knowing the league, it's going to be successful, but require a lot of hard work, a lot of commitment, and I think it can bring great changes to the League of Women Voters, so I congratulate you on that. I thought that what I would do tonight is tell you how I feel about the league. And thank you. We didn't even talk ahead of time. You gave this great lead-in. But it was in, and some of us go back a little bit to that era, but I might be about the oldest one here. In the late 60s, in the late 60s, full-time homemaker, which at that stage most women were. We were living in Burnsville, and the kids were, like in, kindergarten, first grade, something. And I saw an ad in the paper, and it said, if you're interested in learning about your community, call this number. Well, I called the number not knowing what it was, who it was, and it turned out they were organizing a League of Women Voters branch in Burnsville. Well, I raced over to the first meeting, loved what I heard. The league started there, and because I was probably one of the first people at the meeting, I ended up also on the board of directors, which is what happens. But, it was a wonderful experience. And I was assigned to be voter service chairperson. Yay, I know. And it was great fun to finally hold a debate. Our candidates hadn't ever been subjected to a debate, so they obviously all showed up. We were doing voter information to people. And then we thought, to get people to vote, you really have to get them registered. And at that time, you had to go to the city hall during working hours and in person and register. So we went down and negotiated with the city clerk that if we were really properly trained, which he said he would do, and if we took an oath to uphold the law, we could register people other than in City Hall. I still remember the day that we all stood there, with our hand up swearing that we were going to do no wrong and go to the training and register voters. And I'll never forget, because we went out to the PTA meetings, which is where people were in those days, or we went to the neighborhood gatherings. We registered hundreds and hundreds of voters. Burnsville was a growing community with people moving in all the time. It was wonderful, and it started to make some of us think, well, that was easy. We didn't make any mistakes. People were properly registered. They could go vote. Too bad we can't do more of that somewhere. But at that time, that was it. Well, after a couple of other moves, sounds like a very familiar story, doesn't it? After a couple of moves, I learned that the first thing I did when I hit a community was to call the local league. And that happened when we moved to Minnetonka. And I said, where's my unit meeting? What time and what's going on? Well, there, unfortunately, I was asked to do development work. I had never raised money for anything in my life. But I learned to go meet with business people or individuals in the community or someone had told us they might give money. And it truly was a great experience for a politician. I must say, though, it's easier to raise money for the league than for an individual candidate. I did learn that. But that league experience was a little broader for me. We studied housing. Our community felt that, our community leaders felt that we didn't need low-income housing in Minnetonka because no one needed it. Well, we did this huge study and discovered there were lots of people in Minnetonka and Eden Prairie who needed low-income housing. We appeared before that housing commission, didn't get very far. We'd go to the city council, we didn't get very far. But the high point was when a fellow leaguer was elected to the city council. And that must have been in 1970 or 71. And I think it was unusual for women to sit on city councils at that time. And one of my jobs was to observe the city council and then write a little report of what went on to go in the league newsletter. Well, Janet sat up there with these guys, and the meetings were never very long, maybe an hour. They had a long agenda. Short, no discussion, and Janet would ask a question. No discussion. And so she said to me one day, because we'd go together and come home together, and one day she said to me, I think they're meeting somewhere else. Smart. It took us a while. And we said, they always come, I don't care what kind of a meeting it is, whether it's an official meeting or just an unofficial meeting, they always come knowing exactly how they're going to vote. No one asks a single question. No one pays any attention to me, she said, which was true. I was watching it. And so we tried to figure out where they were meeting. And we discovered they were meeting in a local little bar that also served really good pizza. So we went and followed them one night after the council meeting. And we saw where they were, we knew their cars, and we kind of been following for a while, I suppose. And we walked in the door and said, "Hi guys, we're here to join you." Silence. The conversation changed, but I will tell you that the major bill that I authored when I got to the legislature was the open meeting law. Guys back in Minnetonka know what generated that, what the outcome was. The league, our league, as other leagues around the state, were getting, I think, more active at the state level and coordinating more. We, as a city, we were two cities actually, we were Minnetonka and Eden Prairie, would meet with our legislator, and then we'd go over to the Capitol and sit up in the gallery, and in the Senate there were no women, in the House there was one woman, and we'd watch them, as we'd say, watch them vote against our League of Women Voter positions and think, we thought he was kind of agreeing with us. We thought we did a good job. It didn't seem to work. And the one woman in the House, by the way, was Helen McMillan from Austin, who was a former State League of Women voter president. And I thought that was just wonderful. Then one session, and it must have been in the 1970, well, you were there, Tom, in 70, in 71, there was a big push to put party designation on the ballot. Before that, legislators didn't run without knowing if they were Republicans or Democrats. And so this was a statewide, I don't know if any of you were there, but it was a statewide demonstration in the Capitol Rotunda where we all wore paper bags over our head with little holes cut out for our eyes. And it was meant to demonstrate that there was no one there who knew who we were, just like we didn't know who the legislators were if they didn't tell us what party they belonged to. It was quite an experience. I have no idea if it had any impact, but that amendment went on the ballot in 1972 and it passed. So it's only since then that we've had party designation for legislators. Well then, to move to what else happened in 1972 was redistricting, reapportionment, and changed all the district lines. And our legislator decided that he would run for the state senate. And if you'll recall, the early 70s was also the time of the women's movement. And both political parties were saying, you've got to have more women, you know, in the offices in the parties. You've got to have women be delegates. Before that, the men had all the offices and the women did all the work, is the way it was defined. And so they made party rules. You couldn't have a voice at conventions unless half your delegates were women. So we had organized very well for that, and it was a very Republican community at that time, and probably still is, but it was a different style of Republicans, if I might say. Like, lots of my best friends were Republicans, and they were pretty moderate people and league members and people who cared about a lot of things that were going on. And so we thought, we have to get a woman. This is our shot to get a woman in there. And so our league president was a woman named Gwen Luda. And she stepped down from her leadership of the league to go seek the Republican endorsement. So half the leaguers we knew went to that convention, and the rest of us stayed home and hoped. And we thought it was a sure thing. I mean, she'd been active in the PTA, she'd been active in the league, she'd been active in her church. She was bright, talented, knew all the issues, and they didn't endorse her. They endorsed a perfectly nice man who we felt knew nothing about the issues. But he'd been a loyal Republican supporter for many, many years. And as it turns out, that was not unusual. Both parties tended to do that. So everyone is kind of moaning over this loss. And people said, well, we've got to have a Democrat then. So in that district, that was hard to find, but they said, Joan, you have to go and get endorsed. And I said, well, no Democrat's going to win. I don't want to do that. They said, no. The purpose is that we will educate Dick, the Republican candidate, through the election. And our, unlike some districts where you're battling fiercely to get endorsed, our district had, or our communities had, interesting campaign tactics, and they amounted to like 3 coffee parties a day. Morning, afternoon, and night, all hosted by individuals who brought in 10 to 30 friends. And so you sat with your opponent, and when I think back on it, it was probably a good way to get to know the candidates. But you and your opponent sat in someone's living room or family room or something and discussed the issues. And people could feel free to ask questions, and they came out of nowhere and anywhere. And it was really a way to do it. They said, if that happens, then you get endorsed. You can kind of educate him. particularly on school funding issues, which was our big issue in a new growing community. I said, well, I can't anyway because I don't have a babysitter and I don't have a speech. Oh, don't worry about it. League members are resourceful. Someone got a babysitter for me and someone else brought me the speech. The speech was written on recipe cards. And it had the word Republican crossed out and Democrat put in, and I gave the same speech Gwen had given at the Republican And then I was so shocked to hear about colleagues who had to fight for their endorsement. Well, for me, it was like, oh, here she is. Okay, be endorsed, which I did. And then I never saw anyone from the party again.
Of course.
And that's right, of course, it was a hopeless race. In fact, the party chair lived in my district, and I didn't meet him until after I had won the election. But I ended up having another leaguer, of course, run the campaign, and it was primarily league members. It became the thing to do, and we didn't allow men to participate because where were they when we needed them? And so it was a unique happening that we've always thought of as our campaign, our race. And I won. I ended up winning that and went on then to serve in the legislature for a term. Well, 2 years later, I decided to run for Secretary of State. And part of that motivation was the fact that in that legislative session, we passed all kinds of changes in election law. Register by mail, register in person on election day. We put in statewide voter registration, which a lot of people don't realize that up until that time, depending upon where you lived, you registered differently. In some places, you had to go to City Hall and registered. In other places, you didn't have to register at all. Theoretically, they knew you because it was a small town. So talk about change. Talk about change coming all at once, all across the state. And I thought, oh, wow, I think, and the incumbent Secretary of State, who is a great guy and who we have become very good friends, and we find ourselves on the same side of the issues now, he didn't like some parts of that legislation. And so I thought, okay. So I based the whole campaign on including people and making it easier for them to vote. Because who knows what the Secretary of State does? This is something that people truly understood. And I won that election. And of course, the first thing I did was hire, does anyone remember Miriam McCoy? She was the president, a former president of the State League of Women Voters, and I hired her to run the elections division. Well, Marianne and I had the best time the first couple of years, and she stayed longer than that. But it was like, oh, it's like you've been dreaming of what you want to do. We could do it. We had to, pinch ourselves once in a while, but we developed all this election judge training. We developed statutes that included more people to be election judges. We just went to town with a committee of the League of Women Voters. So I thought, this is really the way to go. And Marianne loved it, and the League was a big part of what our agenda was. But that was quite an experiment and quite an experience to implement what I'd been working on for so many years since the late 60s. And I thought, there aren't that many people who are that fortunate that get to do that as I did. The League support was where I learned to raise money, talk in front of people, organize, be part of a group, play well in the sandbox, as they say, and study and learn the issues. That was my advanced degree also, which I think probably did more for me than anything else. We've always said that some male legislators excluded, that the women worked well together in the legislature. There were only 6 of us at that time. 5 of us were elected to join Helen. And Helen was so excited she could hardly stand it. Poor woman. And I thought at the time that she was elderly. She was not elderly. I realize that now. She was probably 55 or something. But, you know, it's all in your point of view. She was extremely young. But the first thing and the first phone call I got after that election was from Helen McMillan, who said, I'd like to take you to dinner at the St. Paul Hotel and bring a friend with you. And so I brought my campaign manager, Gretchen, and the three of us went to the St. Paul Hotel, and it's before it was redone. She said, we'll be in the bar. And Helen sat with the two of us, and she said she didn't ever come there because she didn't want to come alone. And she pointed out all the legislators standing at the bar, sitting at the tables, and she said, this is where the decisions are made. And it was absolutely true. And after that year then, as we came in 1972, we had actually changed some of those changes so that it was more open. But I will say that the League was known then and is still known today as smart, accurate, people who give you the correct information. They come in with no bias except trying to do what's right for the citizens of Minnesota, for their communities. They are considered the good government group of highest prestige, and everyone wants to say supported by the League of Women Voters. That was kind of your good housekeeping seal of approval. I think the work of the League and what you continue to do is just truly amazing, truly important. It has never become less so, and I picked up this editorial in the paper when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about tonight, and I'm going to close with this, but it's the editorial that the Strib did to telling people that they should vote for the amendments to the Charter Commission. And I just think this is just a perfect sentence, if I could read it in this light. What's not to say, where is it? Oh, here it is. But the long list of prominent supporters of the Charter revision, including all of the leading candidates for mayor and the League of Women Voters. Your seal of approval. So thank you very much.